Okay, so for today's recipe, I'm really excited to be using my Echo Show from Amazon. Sometimes we all need a little help in the kitchen, especially with recipes, and this does the trick because it's equipped with Alexa. Hey Alexa, how do you make a pound cake?
Here's a video to show you.
Hey guys, welcome to my kitchen. I am so excited to be partnering up with Amazon Home to show you guys my 3 go-to recipes for the holidays that I love making for my family. So I'm all about at-home cooking, especially this time of year. So the first recipe that I'm going to be showing you is my pound cake. I love baking from scratch, so let me show you guys the ingredients that I use. First up, you want to use 3 cups of flour, 3 cups of white sugar, 1 cup of whole milk, 2 sticks or 2 pounds of butter. Now, the recipe I use calls for unsalted, but I'm using salted today. 5 eggs, half a teaspoon of baking powder, a teaspoon of vanilla, a half teaspoon of salt, and half a stick of shortening or half a pound. So a few notes before we get into the recipe. First up, you want to preheat your oven to 350. Really important, and you can gauge this based off of your oven. For me, my oven is pretty true to temperature. If yours tends to be more on the hotter side, you can kind of reduce the heat accordingly, or if it doesn't get quite as hot, you can increase it to whatever makes you feel comfortable. Now, the biggest thing when it comes to baking from scratch is making sure that you are treating your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients accordingly. They should not all just be thrown into the mixer and just blend it all up and then thrown into the oven, okay? So dry ingredients in one place and wet ingredients in another. I love using these Pyrex bowls to separate my ingredients. Now, you don't necessarily have to be as super meticulous as I am here, but you certainly want to maybe make sure your milk is all aside by itself. Definitely the vanilla. I think usually when I'm not necessarily doing this on camera, I mix my flour, my baking powder, and my salt all together. Your sugar is usually by itself because we're going to cream our sugar with butter and shortening. So that's that. For baking, I always bake my pound cake in a bundt pan. It's so important to me. Make sure you butter your pan. We're gonna lightly flour it before we put it in the oven. And I love this one. It's such a good size. It's, I think, a 9-inch if I'm not mistaken, but it's my go-to. Whenever I make a pound cake, I use a bundt pan. And then of course, we cannot do anything without our trusty mixer. This one from KitchenAid has been with me for the last couple of years. I love it. I got it for Christmas from my family, and I love baking in this thing. So that's what we'll be using here today. Okay, so we are gonna get this cake started. First up, we wanna cream our sugar. So what we're gonna do is we're going to add our butter. Add your butter and add your shortening in here. Then you want to cream that a little bit, get the mixer going, and then you're going to add your sugar slowly. So when you get that going for a few seconds there, about 30 seconds, no longer than a minute, and then we're going to start to add our sugar. So, all right. So we'll add a little bit of sugar, maybe about 1/3 of that. Get that going. And so what you're going to do is alternate between your sugar and your eggs, okay? So I'm gonna keep the mixer going and start to add my eggs. And what you'll want to do is end on sugar. So it should alternate between sugar, egg, until you get through all your eggs. And even if you just have a little bit of sugar left, ending on dry, I know it sounds silly, but it does make a difference in the texture of your cake. I'm gonna use one of my measuring spoons to start adding the sugar little by little so I don't have to keep stopping this thing. Doesn't have to be any particular size, but I am using a 1/8 cup measuring spoon. I'm gonna actually slow it down. You definitely do not want to overmix your cake. So what I like to do is take a spatula and really make sure that my ingredients are nice and mixed before I start to include my dry ingredients. So we're gonna be adding our flour and salt and baking powder in a second, along with our milk. I love these cooking utensils because you can use them for baking, or you can even use them if you're like sauteing or searing anything. It won't scratch your pans. That's one of my favorite things about that. Okay, so next up, we are going to be adding our flour. I just usually will add the baking powder and the salt. I like to add my vanilla last. So we'll add those little bit of ingredients there and get that out of the way. Now, when it comes to adding your flour and your milk, you wanna alternate, similar to how we did the sugar and the eggs. You wanna start with flour, do a little bit of milk, flour, a little bit of milk. You can probably go back, 3 or 4 times, but you definitely wanna start with flour and end with flour. It does, in fact, help the texture of your cake. So let's continue. All right, let's check to see how this thing is looking. It's looking good over here. Again, you just want to take your spatula, make sure all of the dry ingredients are getting mixed in there, and then turn the mixer on again for another 30 to 60 seconds before we put it in the pan. There is nothing like pound cake from scratch straight out of the oven when you cut it. So good. Last but not least, you want to add your vanilla. It's the very, very last thing that I add. And if you're feeling fancy, add a little vanilla paste instead of vanilla extract. To me, it does give the cake a little bit of flavor. All right, next up, let's go ahead and get this cake in the pan. Okay, so we're gonna get the cake in the pan, but before we do, we've gotta make sure that this pan is ready to go. So I'm gonna show you guys the little concoction I make for the cake release. Pretty much it's a little bit of oil, flour, and shortening to make sure that your cake comes out of that pan seamlessly with no issues at all. So first we're gonna do a 1/2 cup of flour. At the end of my flour here. And what I love about this concoction is that it'll stay good for a while, so you can keep it in your pantry, especially if you do a lot of baking during the holidays, which I do. Next up, we're gonna do 1/2 cup of canola oil. You can also use vegetable oil as well. Last but not least, a 1/2 cup of shortening. And then we're just gonna mix it up. Let's see, I'll get my, mix it. So once you're done mixing the ingredients, you want to go ahead and use a brush like I have here and just brush it onto your pan. If you're a little bit more holistic than I am and you need to use your hands, you can do that too. All right, so once you are done brushing your pan with that little cake release concoction, you're ready to go. And you want to make sure your batter is evenly settled in your pan. Just give it a little jiggle. And once it is nice and settled, I try to clean up the pan just so there's not any super random spots of batter on the pan so they don't burn. But it doesn't need to be perfect. Once it's ready to go, you're gonna put it in your preheated oven. All right, and now we are going to put it in the oven on the bottom rack for about anywhere between 55 to like 65 minutes. Again, it's depending on your oven. My oven has a little bit more low heat, so I'm tending to bake it at longer than an hour. All right, you guys, it's time for the cake. Okay, so we're gonna let this settle. We just took it out of the oven, and then we are going to put it on a platter and cut it open. So the cake is done. I am super excited to cut a piece and taste it. It's looking pretty good. I'm really pleased with the color, and it's looking like we're gonna have some luck when it comes out of the pan. I'm gonna be putting the cake on this beautiful cake stand that I also got from Amazon Home. I think it's so pretty. I love the wood and the glass contrasting together. It's just really nice to just set on the dining room table or even the kitchen island for people to see it and get tempted to eat it. So let's see what it looks like. So a little note, we have let this thing sit for about an hour. You absolutely do not want to just take your cake out of the pan when it just comes out of the oven. So let it sit, let it do its thing and settle, and then you put it on your cake stand. Ooh, I'm feeling good. All right, let's see what it looks like. I mean, just. Now that is a pound cake. I am so pleased with how this came out. Like, this is incredible. I cannot wait to cut a piece, so let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys, we put a little powdered sugar on it. Now I'm gonna cut the first slice so we can see what it tastes like. All right, let's see what it tastes like. I'm excited. Perfect, so good. Whatever you're thinking in the camera right now, that's what it tastes like. Whatever you think it tastes like, it tastes even better. So good. Very, very pleased. Easily one of my best pound cakes, easily. Very good. And that does it for my pound cake recipe. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope you use this recipe, impress your relatives this holiday season. I'm gonna be linking to everything that I used here in this video on my blog post, linking back to all of the Amazon Home products I use, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.